Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to your beautiful city. I come from New York and flew straight forward last night to Bogota. And I must say it's the closest to heaven I've ever given a talk. I've traveled a lot. And I must say I really feel very light here. So it's great. I come from Cornell University, which is in Manhattan, on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, next to Rockefeller University. And this is our building when it was built in 1932. The hospital has been around since 1771. And our labor and delivery unit is here on the right side, on the 7th floor overlooking the East River. And that's the same building. We are mostly known in terms of OBGYN as the place where George Papanikolaou, the inventor of the pap smear, actually did do most of his work in the 1940s. So what is patient safety? It's a concept that patients in healthcare settings are achieving the intended outcome. You want a healthy baby, you want a healthy mother. In obstetrics and on labor and delivery, it is often applied to medication errors, instrument errors, and even more far-reaching concepts such as doctor and patient education. The establishment of operation systems and processes that minimize the likelihood of errors and maximize the likelihood of intercepting them so they won't occur. In medicine, this is a relatively new concept. We have been doing the same thing for hundreds and hundreds of years. And this is a total new thing which brings in a very different kind of concept. Our intent is to deliver healthy babies, and sometimes they're not so healthy. And we have to look to see what went wrong. And we need to understand the first thing is people make mistakes. People make mistakes all the time. This is supposed to say stop. Somebody transferred the letters. In places outside hospitals, people have done a lot of work to prevent injury to people when somebody makes a mistake. These are safety belts. Are there laws in Colombia that you have to wear safety belts? There are laws, right. And those are they're not that old. As you know, initially, when safety belts were introduced in the 60s, people felt restricted and they didn't use them. Nowadays, people by law, have to use them. And also, the bags, when you go into an accident. People understand that you make a mistake. And what they want to do with those inventions is they want to prevent you from getting injured when you make a mistake. 10 years ago, in America, the Institute of Medicine reported on mistakes being made in the United States. And they said the first thing we need to do in medicine is not do harm. Make sure that whatever happens, the patient doesn't get hurt. They also said for the first time that it's normal to make a mistake. When you go to your grand rounds, when you go and discuss patients, somebody makes a mistake. Traditionally, that person gets blamed for the mistake. But what patient safety is about is to establish systems that will prevent the patient from getting harmed when the day comes somebody makes a mistake. And in the United States, the number 6 reason for people dying is errors made in hospitals. 100,000 people die each year from mistakes being made. And I'm not going to ask you personally, but if you think back about your career and what you've seen, I'm pretty sure each of you have seen mistakes that might or might not have hurt patients. So that report said that preventable injuries, injuries that could have been prevented, affect 3 to 4% of all patients, and more than 1 million suffer harm and about 100,000 die Those 100,000 people who die each year because of mistakes is more than motor vehicle accidents, breast cancer, and AIDS. So it's an issue that we all need to address. The report also said that over 50% of those events could have been prevented. And this was the first time people said, we make mistakes, let's look how we can prevent injury to the patient. So it's normal to make a mistake. You don't get up in the morning, take a shower, get dressed, go to work, and you say, tomorrow I'm going to make a mistake. Today I'm going to make a mistake. That's not what happens. You go to work and you try to do your best. The nurses go to work, they try to do their best. And still, mistakes do happen. So how can we learn from our mistakes? And how can we change systems to improve the outcome? That's the major question. And we all know mistakes happen, bad things do happen. And car accidents is a good example. 80% of dollars that we lose in obstetrics happen on labor and delivery. You can talk about prenatal care, you can talk about the clinics. The money, the actual money we lose in malpractice suits is happening on labor and delivery, and that's where we need to address most of our issues. There are 5 areas of highest risk for obstetrical harm. 1, failure to recognize fetal distress and non-reassuring fetal status. You all, hopefully not, but many of you have seen bad babies and somebody misinterpreted the tracing. People take too long to do cesarean sections. Inappropriate use of oxytocin or misoprostol. Do you guys use misoprostol? Yes. In this country you do. Failure to properly resuscitate a depressed baby. How often as an obstetrician have you said, the neonatologist came too late? Right? And inappropriate use of vacuum and forceps. So those are the 5 reasons. And I'm going to address some of the issues here. Obviously, it would take much longer to address all of them. I'm going to talk about fatigue. I'm going to talk medication issues. And I'm going to talk about communication issues. Fatigue is the first one. So let me ask you a question. Answer that question for me. I perform best when I'm under stress. Do you agree or disagree? You agree? Okay. Most doctors will agree. After I've been up for 16 hours, I perform as well or even better when compared to my second hour of being on call. True, not true? Are there laws in Colombia how long you can work on labor and delivery as a doctor? 10 hours?
But we work more than 10 hours.
Huh?
The rule is 8 to 10, but we work more.
You work more hours, okay. 24 hours. In the United States, there are no laws. Patient safety on labor and delivery is not affected by doctors working too many and long hours. It is affected, right? And that's something you guys need to learn. You know, I'm from an older generation where we worked 48 hours all weekend on labor and delivery. Still happened? Some older guys in this room? No. But we thought we were tough. But you really... So let me ask you another question. I feel comfortable being in a plane where the pilot has not slept for 16 hours. Would you? Let's say you go into a plane and you hear the pilot says to go ahead. I partied all night. I've been up for 16 hours. I'm now going to fly from Bogota to New York. What are you going to do? Turn around and leave the plane. So why is that so much different with pilots than it is with us? Fatigue is something we all need to address. And it's something that has been addressed in the airline industry. This is a study where they looked at fatigue, alcohol, and performance impairment. And what they did find out that as your blood alcohol concentration increases, your median relative performance decreases. Makes sense, right? You perform not as well the more alcohol you have drunk. And they also found out that the more you are awake, your performance decreases. So your performance decreases both when you drink and when you're more awake. And when they compared performance in people who didn't sleep and people who drank alcohol, they said that if you didn't sleep for 17 to 18 hours, it's like having a blood alcohol level of 0.05. And if you didn't sleep for 24 hours, it's like 0.1. And in Colombia, I'm sure, there is a limit where you can drive. Is there a limit? 0.08? 0.05? 3 beers? Right. So for me, that's whatever it is. But this is what happens. When you don't sleep for 16 hours, you are acting like you're drunk. And I want you to remember this forever. It is not good for the patient. So you're drunk after 17 to 18 hours. Do you want any of these guys to deliver you? I don't think so. Pilots work 8 hours in a 24-hour period. That's the limit. Or 30 hours in 7 days. Doctors often work 24 plus hours consecutively, 100 hours a week and sometimes over 320 hours a month. So we need to look at ourselves and say, what's going on? How important it is for us to be awake and alert and not to make mistakes. The second issue on labor and delivery is medication issues. A medication error is any preventable event that may cause or lead to inappropriate medication use or patient harm. How many of you have seen medication errors on labor and delivery? A lot, right? At least one. So on average, a hospital patient is subject to at least one medication error per day. It's amazing if you really look at those. And most of those will not harm patients. You order an antibiotic, the nurse doesn't give it. You order Tylenol, the nurse, that's a medication error. When they look, this is a database where they look at errors. And the number 1 is ampicillin, but the number 2 is oxytocin. Oxytocin is the number 1 drug on labor and delivery associated with patients' harm. It is a bad medicine. It's used more and more, as you know. It's a bad medicine. And I particularly feel responsible for it because Dr. Duvigneau, 55 years ago, received a Nobel Prize for synthesizing oxytocin, and he worked at Cornell. So whatever patients' harm are being done from oxytocin, we are partially. So oxytocin is one thing you need to really pay attention to very closely. It's the number 1 drug on labor and delivery, number 1 drug responsible for late decelerations, and it's the number 1 drug to injure babies and mothers. It's a high alert medication. So this is a regular tracing. You have contractions 2 to 3 minutes apart. They come in a little bit closer, Pitocin 2 milliunits, and then all of a sudden you have something called a prolonged deceleration and then fetal bradycardia. And this patient was in Pitocin. So what actually happens? Have you guys seen on your unit tracings like this? You've seen it. What I want you to do from today on, instead of saying, oh, we did a stat C-section, baby is fine, I want you to go back and investigate. You guys watch American crime shows here? CSI? Okay. I want you to create an OB-CSI. What they do is they make sure nobody touches anything. Nobody touches it. You go there and investigate. Because in this case, this is what happened. A patient received an intravenous Swingers lactate to the patient, right? An IV. She received Pitocin. And there's a pump here, and it goes closest to the patient. Is this about what you're doing in Colombia? You have a pump? You have electronic pumps. Okay, good. So the pump starts at how much usually? 1 milli. How much Pitocin do you put in a solution Pitocin? How much is your bag? 10 units in 500? 5 units in 500? 20 units in 1,000? 3 units in 500? 2 units? Okay, so this already shows you. This is one thing who's the president of the society? One thing you guys need to look into is when you have different protocols and different ways to do it, mistakes will happen. Mistakes will happen. So let's say we have 30 units in 500 cc. We start with 1 cc per hour, and in this tube there's about 10 cc, but it goes very slowly. So the patient received an antibiotic. The antibiotic was supposed to be in this tube and then runs with ringer lactate. The nurse hung the antibiotic on the Pitocin tube, and then Pitocin was flushed. The patient received about 1,000 times the amount she was supposed to receive. And that's what happened. Let me go back to the tracing, and this is a telltale sign, the contraction. You see tetanic contraction. And that can injure and kill babies. So that's one mistake people can make. A second patient, she's 42 years old, she gets Pitocin, second baby. Pitocin started at 2 o'clock, and then she gets ruptured membranes at 7 o'clock and ruptured membranes. And this is the whole tracing. From the beginning, 7 o'clock till 8 o'clock. Tetanic contraction. Again, same kind of picture. The IV did not run. The nurse couldn't get access. And this, we only found out about it 6 hours later, because the nurse came personally to me and said, I think a mistake happened. And let me explain to you what happened. And guess what I did she says, I made a mistake. What do you think I did with the nurse? What would traditionally happen, and what do you think happened in this circumstance? When she told me she made a mistake. Traditionally, they get penalized, right? And they get fired. That's the traditional way to mistakes. This nurse got a prize for honesty, and she got a prize for teaching us in the future how to prevent this kind of mistakes, because she was a good nurse and she didn't. So the nurse couldn't get access. She disconnected the IV. She called anesthesia. Anesthesia got the IV access. The nurse was not in the room, and anesthesia connected oxytocin to the IV, and then the IV was opened right, because the nurse thought it was the regular Ringer's lactate, not the Pitocin. And we now have collected many similar tracings with mistakes made with Pitocin. Magnesium sulfate is a drug that I think you guys use a lot. I heard somebody tell me you have a lot of preeclampsia, and you use magnesium sulfate for prevention. And it's a deadly drug. There are several reports. There's one case series of 16 patients being killed with magnesium sulfate. Hospital error, killed woman. An 18-year-old who had come to South Florida with labor received 4 times the ordered dosage of magnesium sulfate, and she died. This happens on a regular basis. A patient received magnesium sulfate for preterm labor. After delivery, instead of oxytocin, magnesium sulfate was infused at a rapid rate, and it had been discontinued, the IV line removed, but the bag was there. So what we have done at our hospital, this didn't happen at our hospital. What we did at our hospital is we color-coded the bags different color. So oxytocin has a different color than magnesium sulfate. Is this what you guys are doing in your hospital? No. Yes? No. So my strong recommendation is you go home. How much more money does it cost to color-code it differently? It doesn't cost different, right? So that's one of my recommendations. Color-code it, because in real life, colors signify something. So medication errors is one thing that needs to be addressed. And the last one is communication issues. Communication was found to be the #1 reason for babies dying on labor and delivery. We all need to speak the same language. Even though I speak English, you mostly speak Spanish. Even though mostly you speak Spanish on the labor and delivery floor, people don't necessarily speak the same understanding. You may say something, the other person understands it differently. And for those of you who are married or have been married, you know what I'm talking about. Team training is something that has been introduced about 7 years ago in the United States, and it's now a requirement. Not all hospitals have been doing it, but those hospitals who did it say that it works. And it comes from the airline industry. The biggest accident ever, 30 years ago, 583 people dead. 2 airplanes colliding in Tenerife in Spain. And the airline industry learned from this mistake, and all pilots need to do team training. It is usually 4 to 8 hour course, and you learn a different language. You learn something called check back. You read back abnormal findings. Somebody says her hematocrit is 5. Just because the person says this to you, it doesn't mean you hear it. So you repeat it so the other person knows you understand. 2 challenge rule, one of the most difficult things for people to understand. Anybody on labor and delivery can challenge somebody's decision. They will tell them, I don't like what you're doing. And the person says, leave me alone, I'm the senior doctor. And then you say a second time, I feel uncomfortable. What you're doing, let's talk about it. And when that person doesn't listen to you second time, that person has to go. Very difficult. But we all have been there where we saw people make mistakes and then we walked away. Call out, let everybody else know what you're doing. When you have shoulder dystocia, let everybody know in the room you do have shoulder dystocia. And hand off, when you sign off to somebody else, it has to be done effectively. At Beth Israel in Boston, what they did do is they instituted team training, and they saw a decrease in their adverse outcomes. And in my talk on preventing lawsuits, I will show you the Cornell experience. So when you prevent major mistakes on labor and delivery, you should consider a fatigue policy. Make sure somebody understands what it means to be tired. And one important thing I want you to all learn about is when you are tired, you need to understand you don't perform well. So there are several ways to deal with this. One is to find somebody else to cover you. Anybody else can come up with a different way? What you can do to prevent mistake to your patients? You can say to the nurses or to other doctors, I am tired right now. Please watch me. I am not in my best shape. I want you to watch me, and I want you to see if I make a mistake, prevent me from making that mistake. That is a very difficult thing to do for most doctors, but it's important. Address medication issues. Look at magnesium sulfate, look at oxytocin. And one thing you need to understand, despite all discussions, we do not use misoprostol at Cornell. We don't use it. And then improve communication. Do something called team training. If you're interested, I can give you more information about this. Reducing obstetric litigation through alterations. These authors looked at to see when we change something, what can it do? And they found out that published checklist-driven protocols for oxytocin, misoprostol, and methylsulfate will make a difference. They also found out that patients, that many cases of fetal monitoring cases were avoidable. So teaching your staff the same language, including the nurses. Do you have teaching session where nurses and doctors sit together in the same room all the time? That's wonderful. 80% of patients who had VBAC, vaginal birth after cesarean. Do you still do VBAC in Colombia? Yes. Been limited to spontaneous labor. Our maternal fetal medicine group at this point is extremely reluctant to use Pitocin for VBAC cases. And many of us don't even use it. And shoulder dystocia is important, document and make sure that people are trained and have better care. So this is a paper I published in 2007. Conduct team training. Start drills. Do you do any drills, formal drills in your hospital? If you don't, you should start thinking about it. Have a clear oxytocin policy and just one. That's my recommendation. Don't let other people, because nurses don't understand different protocols. Have a clear VBAC protocol, vaginal birth after cesarean. Have clear fetal monitoring guidelines. Make sure people understand where to call for help. Make sure neonatal resuscitation is done well, and have a standardized medical record. Those are my recommendations to improve safety. And this is something, one of my favorite quotes from Albert Einstein: doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's the definition of insanity. We doctors have been crazy because we've been doing the same thing over and over again. We have to start changing our way. Now, we can't continue to be crazy. Oh, this is wrong, I'm sorry, didn't want to show it. And so this is actually I showed you this picture because I was a big fan of the Colombian soccer team at the World Cup in 1990 in Italy, where they shot a great goal against my team, Germany. And this is, you know what this is? Anybody knows? It's Klinsmann. It's Klinsmann who was the coach for the German. So I loved that team, except that part where the goalkeeper ran out and they took away the ball from him. So don't do the same mistake again and again. Otherwise, this can also happen to you. To make it safe on labor and delivery is a journey, not a destination, and you need to try again and again until you succeed. And so many regards from New York Hospital, Weill Cornell, which was the architecture after the Pope's Palace in Avignon. And it was a lunatic asylum initially, so crazy people used to work there, and we don't try to make it crazy. Thank you.